Riverdale has introduced a whole new generation of teens to Archie. Well, sort of. They may have the same setting and the same names, but details have morphed into something else entirely, to the point that the results are nearly unrecognizable. And those who are familiar with the original will probably be very confused as to how the two franchises are related at all. So, when it comes to Riverdale the show versus the comics, what's actually the difference? Well, let me tell you, there are quite a few. And they're not exactly small differences either. For starters, Jason Blossom never actually dies in the comics. They couldn't have done something to more deliberately and definitively establish Riverdale as nothing that fans had been expecting from a modern-day Archie. In Riverdale, the murder of Jason Blossom dominates the whole first season, ending with the insidious reveal about the true lives of Blossom. However, in the comics, Blossom was simply written out. And then we have Jughead. It's true that he still wears the same sweater, and his dog and his sister still have their unusual names, but pretty much everything else about Jughead has changed in Riverdale. His darkness and his work ethic stand out especially. What high schooler could take over their father's gang and stay on top of Riverdale's most private conspiracies and take many naps as the original Jughead does, all at the same time? There's just no way. Jughead also appears to have gotten a promotion, as he's now the narrator of the story. That's definitely new. Even though Jughead's paranoia may have deepened, and his family allegiances have become infinitely more complicated, not to mention his glow-up. Something that did remain irrevocably the same is the teenage boy's ravenous appetite. It took a while before we got our iconic shot of Cole Sprouse digging in on a hamburger, but get it we did, eventually. And to be honest, a milkshake at Pop's will never stop being a necessary part of life. Something that isn't a part of life anymore is the rivalry between Betty and Veronica. It used to be Betty versus Veronica in the comics, but the times have changed quite a bit, and females no longer only live for boys in TV shows. Gone are the days that Betty and Veronica hated each other's guts. Instead, their characters have a whole lot more depth and a much better relationship than they had in the comics. And that's why we now have Betty and Veronica as opposed to Betty versus Veronica. Now, let's talk about crossovers. Because the one crossover that happens in Riverdale never even takes place in the comics. But the comics themselves are absolutely rife with crossovers. Some of them are so retro that they'll make no sense at all to modern-day audiences. I wonder why Riverdale hasn't utilized this more often as well. Anyway, something else that is completely different is the fact that Reggie Mantle can't beat up Archie that easily anymore. In the 1941 edition of Archie, the people of Riverdale are caught up in basic training for the United States military, which makes total sense given the time it was published. But 6 decades later, there's obviously no plot lines revolving around military involvement. Well, apart from Archie's neighborhood militia of the Red Circle in Riverdale, of course. But aside from that, there simply isn't any reason for such plot lines to be part of the narrative. That being said, there's no denying that Reggie Mantle plays a much more aggressive role as a bully in the comic version. It's true that he's not exactly the greatest on Riverdale either, but I mean, he greets Archie by almost knocking him unconscious in one of the first few pages of the comics. The same kind of goes for Veronica, I think. Veronica wasn't necessarily nice in the comics, but she wasn't part of a crime family either. In other words, in the good old days, Mr. Lodge was much more concerned with curbing his daughter's dating life and excessive spending habits than illegal behavior. Yes, the Hiram Lodge of Riverdale is just as wealthy as his pen and paper counterpart. But let's be honest, he's a lot closer to a mobster boss than a helicopter dad, don't you think? He's not just rigging the high school spelling bee here. He's actually destroying entire towns without a single thought for the lives involved. But all that aside, Veronica sure is a whole lot nicer, so there's that. Does that balance it out again? Speaking about dads though, we need to talk about Archie's dad. To put it simply, Archie's father in the original comics is absolutely no Luke Perry. Because Archie's father in the original comics is a rather stout man who wears a blue sweater and has a regrettable hairline. In short, he's no Luke Perry. It makes total sense that the CW decided to give Fred a refurbishment. Perry first shot to fame as a heartthrob on Beverly Hills 90210, so he was used to being the center of certain attention. But still, if they hadn't done that, there's just no way that audiences would be nearly as invested about his past dalliances with Veronica's mother Hermione.
I genuinely thought that at least one of your characters would be like held back by now. Who do you think like is actually doing the most schoolwork? Who's like the most studious?
4.0. I think all of the girls are pretty.
You always see Betty doing hers.
You work at a nightclub. What do you have time to do? I'm running a business.
Yeah, you're running a business. What do you have time to run school?
Do you not say I'm applying to Harvard?
Or his slightly tenuous relationship with his fellow 80s teen star, Mary Andrews. And Riverdale really wouldn't have been the same without Perry, would it? Sadly, Luke Perry unexpectedly passed away after suffering a stroke in March 2019 when he was only 52 years old. And his death was honored in Riverdale as well. So yeah, we can honestly say that Riverdale isn't quite the same without Luke Perry in it. And while we're talking about characters who've gotten a major makeover that is so flattering that they're really just blatantly changing facts, what did Miss Grundy have? Because maybe she should let the rest of us in on her secret. But once again, the showrunners made a very smart move by updating Miss Grundy. Because there's just no way that the original secret relationship between music teacher Ms. Grundy and Archie would have been half as intriguing, or even watchable, if the showrunners had stayed true to their source material. And we wouldn't just have missed out on the ill-fated bond between Archie and Ms. Grundy, though it's probably more of a compulsive habit for Ms. Grundy and tragically naive love for Archie. But anyway, the Black Hood would have had a really hard time finding a reason to do away with our dear Miss Grundy, unless she was hiding some horrific secrets under an elderly facade in the comics. But I highly doubt it. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, all in all, it pretty much goes without saying that the absurdly popular reincarnation of Archie has not just introduced a new generation of teens to the franchise. Riverdale has absolutely introduced themes that are mature and dark enough that real towns have issues approaching them. Just take a look at Ms. Grundy. Of course, we get why Archie is attracted to her. I mean, come on. But when we're being honest, this is undeniably an educator in a position of power with an illegal habit of relationships with teenage boys. It's exactly the kind of scandal that would wake up a sleepy small town. But it certainly wouldn't have fit in the rather innocent pages of the original Archie. I don't know how they did it, but somehow, the showrunners of Riverdale made a brilliant reimagination of a new world, using the same ingredients, and still ending up with something that is truly amazing, even with all the changes they've made. Or is it especially because of the changes they made? Either way, so far, the difference is between the Riverdale show and the comics. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.